The Warlord's warning. The dimly lit bar hummed with the low chatter of mercenaries and traders. Gravrik of the Dothar, a towering alien with scars etched across his rough, stone-like skin, stood in the center, his voice booming over the room. His reputation as a ruthless warlord preceded him, but tonight, his tone carried an unusual weight. "You think you understand war," Gravrik began, his deep-set eyes scanning the room. "You think you've seen everything the galaxy has to offer, until you meet them. The humans." The mention of the word drew curious murmurs. Humans were known, of course. A young species, relatively new to the galactic stage, possessing modest technology and scattered colonies, hardly the kind of beings to invoke fear. Yet Gravrik's expression silenced the room. "You laugh now," Gravrik said, his voice dropping. "But I've faced them. I've seen what they're capable of. And I'm here to tell you, they are unlike any other species in the galaxy. You don't want them as your enemies." The room fell into a tense silence. Even the bartender, a spindly alien with too many eyes, paused mid-pour, his curiosity piqued. Gravrik took a long sip from his drink before leaning back in his chair. "It started on Altera Prime," he began, his voice heavy with memory. "A small colony on the edge of human-controlled space. My fleet was fresh from a string of conquests. The humans were just another stepping stone, or so we thought." The audience leaned in, the air thick with anticipation. Gravrik's voice grew sharper, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "We came in strong. Hundreds of ships, legions of soldiers. The humans didn't even have time to raise an alarm. We thought it would be quick, clean. A show of strength to remind the galaxy who ruled the outer sectors." His jaw tightened, the muscles in his stone-like face twitching. "We were wrong. Gravrik's fleet had descended upon Altera Prime with overwhelming force. The human colony, nestled among lush green valleys and rolling mountains, appeared peaceful, unprepared. Gravrik had watched from the bridge of his flagship as his forces bombarded the surface, targeting key infrastructure and military installations. At first, it was easy, Gravrik recounted. Their defenses crumbled. Their forces scattered. We swept through their cities like a storm, burning and pillaging. It was a textbook invasion. But then, something changed. Gravrik's fleet encountered resistance, not from advanced weaponry or overwhelming numbers, but from something far more dangerous: human determination. "They fought back," Gravrik said, his voice tinged with both awe and frustration. "Not with superior firepower or tactics, but with sheer audacity. They used everything they had: civilian vehicles, industrial equipment, even their bare hands." He paused, his eyes narrowing as he remembered the first time he saw them rally. "I'll never forget it. A group of them, miners, farmers, engineers, turned the ruins of a factory into a fortress. They had no chance, yet they held the line against my elite troops for hours." Gravrik leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Do you know what it's like to fight someone who doesn't fear death, who fights not for glory or riches, but for survival? It's like fighting a force of nature." The aliens in the bar listened in stunned silence, the weight of Gravrik's words sinking in. Even the most hardened among them looked uneasy. Gravrik's tale was far from over. "As the battle dragged on, we began to see their ingenuity," Gravrik continued. "They turned the environment against us, collapsed buildings on our troops, used the terrain to ambush our patrols. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they made every inch of ground cost us dearly." Gravrik's fists clenched as he spoke, his knuckles turning pale. And then there was the leader, a human woman, Captain Ilara Moore. She was unlike anyone I'd ever faced. Brilliant, fearless, ruthless. He closed his eyes, as if seeing her face in his mind. She rallied her people, coordinated their resistance, and outsmarted my commanders at every turn. She was the one who turned the tide. Gravrik opened his eyes, his gaze hardening. By the time I realized the true threat we were facing, it was too late. My fleet was in disarray, my soldiers demoralized. And the humans, they just kept coming. The room was deathly quiet, the aliens hanging on Graverick's every word. He leaned back, his voice softening, but losing none of its intensity. "You think you know war," he said, his tone heavy with finality. "But until you've faced humans, you don't know anything." Graverick finished his drink, the glass hitting the table with a dull thud. He stood, towering over the room, his presence commanding. "Remember my words," he said, his voice echoing through the bar. "Never underestimate them. They may seem weak, but they are the deadliest force in the galaxy." With that, Graverick turned and walked out, leaving the bar in stunned silence. The gathered aliens exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of Graverick's warning settling over them like a storm cloud. The bartender finally broke the silence, muttering under his breath, "Humans, who would have thought?" Outside, Graverick disappeared into the shadows, his mind still haunted by the memories of Altera Prime. He knew the galaxy would learn, sooner or later, what he had come to understand. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and their true power was only beginning to emerge. The Battle of Altera Prime. The Warlord's fleet emerged from hyperspace above Altera Prime like a storm on the horizon. Hundreds of ships, from nimble fighters to hulking battleships, glided into orbit, casting long shadows over the lush green planet below. Graverick stood on the bridge of his flagship, Vengeance of Dothar, a vessel as massive and intimidating as its master. The humans wouldn't know what hit them. "They've barely begun to deploy defenses," one of Graverick's commanders reported, his voice confident. "Their orbital network is rudimentary at best. They won't last a day." Graverick nodded, his gaze fixed on the tactical display. "Begin the bombardment. Target their cities and military outposts. Break their will before they can even think to fight back." The first wave of strikes was surgical, targeting communication hubs, power plants, and transportation networks. Explosions rippled across the planet's surface, and Graverick allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was the way it had always been: swift, decisive, unstoppable. But Altera Prime was about to prove different. The resistance awakens. The humans' initial response was predictable: chaos and panic. Civilians fled the cities, and their scattered military forces scrambled to mount a defense. Graverick's troops landed with precision, deploying advanced mechs and shock troopers to secure key positions. "It's almost too easy," one of his lieutenants sneered as his squad advanced through a deserted industrial district. But as the invaders pushed deeper into the colony, the humans began to adapt. The first sign of trouble came when a supply convoy disappeared in the northern mountains. Graverick dismissed it as an isolated incident, until reports began flooding in from other units. Ambushes, sabotage, entire patrols wiped out by traps and guerrilla tactics. "They're using their environment against us," one commander reported, his tone laced with frustration. "They know this terrain. We don't." Graverick frowned. The humans weren't just reacting. They were planning, coordinating, and their leader was proving to be a formidable adversary. The rise of Ilara Moore. Captain Ilara Moore had been a logistics officer before the invasion, tasked with overseeing supply chains and infrastructure development. But when the first bombs fell, she stepped into a role she had never anticipated: commander of Altera Prime's resistance. "We can't match their firepower," she told her team during a hastily convened meeting in an underground bunker. "But we can outthink them. They rely on their machines and their arrogance. Let's use that against them." Ilara's strategies were bold and unorthodox. She ordered her engineers to rig collapsed buildings with explosives, creating traps for the invaders. Farmers turned irrigation systems into weapons, flooding enemy encampments and forcing them into exposed positions. Mechanics reprogrammed drones and mining equipment to attack Graverick's troops. Every scrap of metal, every drop of fuel, every second of time. "They're all weapons," Ilara said, her voice steady despite the weight of the battle. "We use everything." Her words ignited a spark in her people, and that spark became an inferno, a war of attrition. As the days turned into weeks, Graverick's confidence began to waver. His forces were still dominant, but they were no longer invincible. Every advance came at a cost, and the humans seemed to grow stronger with every setback. "They fight like cornered beasts," Graverick muttered during a strategy meeting, his frustration palpable. "Relentless. Unyielding." His commanders struggled to adjust. Advanced tactics faltered against human unpredictability. Superior technology was rendered useless by the humans' resourcefulness. And the losses. Oh, the losses. Graverick's once mighty fleet was bleeding soldiers and resources faster than it could replenish them. Then came the incident that changed everything. The factory standoff. Graverick's forces had cornered a group of human resistance fighters in an abandoned factory. The building was a crumbling relic from the colony's industrial past, its walls streaked with rust and soot. The Warlord ordered his troops to storm the structure, confident it would fall quickly. But when the attack began, the factory erupted in chaos. Hidden explosives tore through Graverick's soldiers. Makeshift barricades funneled attackers into kill zones, where human marksmen picked them off one by one. The humans fought with a ferocity that defied logic, their desperation fueling their determination. Graverick himself descended to the battlefield, determined to crush the resistance personally. But as he entered the factory, he was met with a sight that stopped him cold. There she was, Captain Elara Moore, standing in the center of the room, her clothes singed, her face smeared with grime, but her eyes burning with unshakable resolve. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This is our home, and we'll fight for it until there's nothing left." Graverick raised his weapon, but before he could fire, the floor beneath him gave way. The humans had rigged the factory with explosives, and the Warlord barely escaped with his life as the building collapsed around him. The toll of arrogance. Graverick's fleet retreated from the factory, battered and humiliated. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, his pride in tatters as he surveyed the damage. Altera Prime was supposed to be a conquest, a symbol of his dominance. Instead, it was becoming his greatest failure. "They've cost us too much," one of his advisors said, his voice trembling. "Perhaps we should consider withdrawal." "Withdraw," Graverick growled, his voice like thunder. "Never. We are Dother. We do not retreat." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. The humans had turned their colony into a battlefield, their determination defying every expectation. Graverick had faced countless enemies in his career, but none like this. "They don't fight like soldiers," he muttered to himself. "They fight like survivors." And deep down, Graverick knew that survivors were the most dangerous adversaries of all. The turning point. The destruction of the factory marked a shift in the battle for Altera Prime. Graverick's fleet, once a symbol of unstoppable might, now found itself struggling to maintain control. The humans, though battered and outnumbered, had turned the tide in ways the Warlord had never anticipated. Graverick paced the bridge of his flagship, the glow of tactical displays reflecting off his hardened features. Reports streamed in, each one worse than the last. "They've sabotaged 3 more supply lines," a tactical officer reported, his voice trained. "Our forward bases are struggling to maintain operations." Another officer chimed in. "Their air units, converted mining drones, are targeting our heavy transports. Losses are mounting." Graverick slammed a fist onto the console, his frustration boiling over. "They're cockroaches. They should have been crushed days ago." But deep down, Graverick knew the truth. The humans weren't just fighting to survive. They were winning. The human counteroffensive. The first signs of a coordinated counterattack came from the northern continent. Human resistance fighters, led by Captain Elara Moore, launched a series of strikes against Graverick's forces. Supply depots exploded in fiery bursts, communications towers collapsed, and key transport routes became death traps. Graverick's commanders scrambled to respond, but every move they made played into the humans' hands. Ilara's strategies were precise, exploiting every weakness in the Dothar war machine. "They've studied us," Gravrik muttered, his fists clenched as he reviewed the latest battle reports. "They know how we think, how we fight, and they're using it against us." The humans' adaptability was their greatest weapon. They learned from every encounter, evolving their tactics with alarming speed. No two ambushes were the same, no two strategies predictable. It was as if they thrived on chaos, turning it into their greatest advantage. The relentless spirit. One skirmish in particular haunted Gravrik. His troops had cornered a group of human fighters in a dense forest. Outnumbered and outgunned, the humans had no chance of escape. Gravrik himself had ordered the final assault, confident it would end in victory. But the humans didn't run. They didn't surrender. Instead, they fought with a ferocity that defied logic. Gravrik watched from his command post as a single human soldier charged headfirst into a line of Dothar shock troops. He wielded a makeshift weapon, a metal rod rigged with explosives, and his face was a mask of determination. The explosion that followed tore through Gravrik's forces, leaving chaos in its wake. The soldier's sacrifice had bought his comrades enough time to retreat, their morale unshaken despite the odds. "They fight like their lives mean nothing," one of Gravrik's lieutenants remarked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "But it's more than that. They fight like their lives mean everything." Desperation breeds ingenuity. As Gravrik's forces continued to falter, he began to understand the true nature of his enemy. The humans weren't just surviving. They were thriving under pressure, turning their desperation into innovation. Reports of their ingenuity grew more baffling by the day. One unit had constructed a massive catapult from salvaged industrial machinery, launching explosive barrels at Dothar outposts with devastating accuracy. Another group had weaponized the planet's wildlife, luring aggressive native creatures into enemy encampments. They turned the entire planet into a weapon, Gravrik muttered during a strategy meeting. "Every tree, every rock, every creature, everything is a tool for their survival." Ilara Moore's influence was evident in every move the humans made. Her leadership was a beacon of hope for the resistance, inspiring them to fight harder, smarter, and braver than anyone could have imagined. "She's their heart," Gravrik said, his voice low. "If we cut her down, the rest will follow." The assassination attempt. Gravrik devised a plan to eliminate Ilara, hoping it would demoralize the resistance and turn the tide back in his favor. His best operatives were deployed, tasked with infiltrating the humans' command center and neutralizing their leader. The operation was meticulously planned, every detail accounted for. But when the time came, Gravrik's forces found themselves outmaneuvered once again. Ilara had anticipated the attack. The command center was a decoy, rigged with traps that decimated the Dothar strike team. Meanwhile, the real command center remained hidden, its location known only to a select few. Gravrik's frustration boiled over. "She's always one step ahead," he growled, his voice echoing through the command deck. "How does she do it?" The answer was simple. Ilara understood the stakes. She knew that every decision she made, every risk she took, could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. And she thrived in that pressure. The cost of arrogance. As Gravrik's fleet continued to falter, cracks began to appear in his once unshakable confidence. His troops were demoralized, his resources dwindling, and the humans showed no signs of slowing down. "They're not just fighting us," one of his advisors observed. "They're breaking us." Gravrik stared at the tactical display, the glowing icons representing his dwindling forces. He had underestimated the humans from the beginning, viewing them as primitive and disorganized. But now he saw them for what they truly were, a force of nature, unstoppable in their determination. "We thought we could crush them," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "But we've only made them stronger." The turning point. The final blow came during a coordinated human assault on Gravrik's main base of operations. Ilara Moore led the charge, her forces striking with precision and ferocity. They overwhelmed the Dothar defenses, forcing Gravik to order a full retreat. As he watched the flames consume his once mighty base, Gravik felt a bitter mix of rage and respect. The humans had done the impossible. They had turned the tide against one of the galaxy's most feared warlords. "They've won this battle," Gravik admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But this isn't over. Not yet." Even as his fleet limped away from Altera Prime, Gravik knew he would never forget the humans who had defied him. They were more than just survivors. They were warriors, innovators, and perhaps the most dangerous species he had ever encountered. Humanity's vengeance. Gravik's fleet retreated from Altera Prime, battered and humiliated. The once mighty warlord, whose name struck fear across the galaxy, now found himself grappling with a bitter truth. The humans were not prey. They were hunters. The humans' victory on Altera Prime had emboldened them, igniting a fire that spread across their colonies. Gravik had expected them to remain defensive, to focus on rebuilding what his fleet had destroyed. Instead, they launched a counteroffensive that shook the galaxy. "They're chasing us," Gravik muttered, staring at the tactical display aboard his flagship. Icons representing human ships flickered ominously as they moved closer. "These primitives, they're actually chasing us." A relentless pursuit. What began as a retreat quickly turned into a desperate flight. The humans pursued Gravik's fleet across the star systems, their ragtag ships darting through hyperspace with a tenacity that defied their limited resources. "They shouldn't even be capable of hyperspace travel at this level," one of Gravik's commanders protested during a tense strategy meeting. "Their ships are outdated, cobbled together from scrap." Gravik silenced him with a glare. "And yet, they're keeping pace." The human ships were indeed primitive compared to the sleek, advanced vessels of the Dothar fleet, but they were fast, agile, and piloted by crews who seemed to thrive on pushing their ships, and themselves, to the brink. They turned their disadvantages into strengths, Gravik observed grimly. "Where we see limitations, they see opportunities." The first strike. The first human strike against Gravik's retreating fleet came in the Talfor Nebula, a sprawling expanse of gas clouds and asteroid fields. Gravik had ordered his ships to take cover there, hoping to regroup and repair their damaged systems. It was a fatal miscalculation. The humans used the nebula's dense clouds to their advantage, launching surprise attacks from the shadows. Their ships moved with uncanny precision, weaving through asteroid fields and striking Gravik's vessels with devastating accuracy. "They're using the terrain like a weapon," one of Gravik's lieutenants reported, panic creeping into his voice. "We can't track them in the nebula." Gravik clenched his jaw as he watched another of his frigates explode in a burst of fire and debris. The humans were picking his fleet apart, one ship at a time. The Lone Wolf. The most harrowing moment of the battle came when a single human ship, a small, heavily modified corvette, broke through Gravik's defenses and targeted his flagship. The corvette was a patchwork of scavenged parts, its hull scorched and battered, but it moved with the precision of a predator. Gravik's gunners fired relentlessly, but the corvette danced through the chaos, its pilot anticipating every move. The human ship unleashed a volley of torpedoes, one of which struck Vengeance of Dothar with a force that rocked the entire vessel. "Damage report," Gravik barked, gripping the armrests of his command chair. "Shields at 40%, a crew member reported. Hull integrity compromised." The corvette disappeared into the nebula, its mission complete. Gravik's flagship limped away, its systems barely holding together. "They're not just fighting us," Gravik muttered, his voice low and bitter. "They're toying with us." The silent threat. As Gravik's fleet continued its retreat, the humans' tactics became even more unnerving. They stopped launching direct attacks, instead opting for psychological warfare. They hacked into the fleet's communication channels, broadcasting unsettling messages and images of their victories on Altera Prime. "They're trying to break us," one of Gravik's officers said, his voice trembling. "And it's working." Gravik said nothing, his gaze fixed on the holographic display before him. The human strategy was brilliant, designed not just to destroy his fleet, but to dismantle its morale. "They don't just want to win," Graverick finally said. "They want to send a message." A desperate gamble. With his fleet on the verge of collapse, Graverick made a desperate gamble. He ordered his remaining ships to regroup at the abandoned colony of Vorka 7, a desolate planet with limited strategic value. His hope was to lure the humans into a trap, using the planet's unstable atmosphere as a weapon. "It's a risk," one of his advisors warned. "If they outmaneuver us again." "They won't," Graverick snapped. "This time, we control the battlefield." The fleet arrived at Vorka 7 and began fortifying its position. Graverick's ships deployed energy mines in the planet's orbit and used its harsh terrain to set up ambush points. For the first time in weeks, Graverick felt a flicker of hope. The final confrontation. The humans arrived within days, their fleet smaller but no less determined. Graverick watched from the bridge of his flagship as the enemy ships approached, their formation tight and disciplined. They'd fallen into the trap, Graverick said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Prepare to activate the mines." The energy mines detonated as planned, unleashing a wave of destruction that tore through the human fleet. Graverick's forces launched their counterattack, striking with renewed vigor. For a brief moment, it seemed as though victory was within reach. But the humans had anticipated the trap. As Graverick's ships pressed their advantage, the humans revealed their true strategy. A second wave of human ships emerged from hyperspace, bypassing the mines and targeting Graverick's command vessels. The Dothar fleet, already stretched thin, was overwhelmed. Graverick's flagship took the brunt of the assault. Explosions rocked the ship as human boarding parties breached its defenses. Graverick fought alongside his soldiers, his strength and skill unmatched. But even he could not stem the tide. A humbling defeat. In the end, Graverick was forced to abandon his flagship. He and a handful of his crew escaped aboard a small transport, leaving the remains of his fleet behind. The humans had won, not just the battle, but the war. As Graverick stared out the viewport of his transport, watching the wreckage of his once mighty fleet drift through space, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Defeat, yes, but also respect. "They're more than warriors," he said quietly. "They're survivors, and survivors always find a way to win." Lessons of defeat. The transport's engines hummed softly as it slipped through the debris field, leaving behind the shattered remnants of Graverick's once mighty fleet. The Warlord sat in silence, his massive frame slumped in the cramped cockpit. His crew avoided his gaze, their own morale broken by the devastating loss. Graverick's mind raced as he replayed the events leading to his downfall. Every decision, every strategy, every misstep. The humans had turned his greatest strengths against him, exploiting every weakness he hadn't realized he possessed. "They were supposed to break," Graverick muttered, his voice a low growl. "They were supposed to kneel." But they hadn't. And now Graverick, once the most feared warlord in the galaxy, was fleeing for his life. The weight of defeat. The transport's meager sensors picked up no signs of pursuit. The humans, it seemed, were content to let Graverick go. For now. But their message had been clear. They were not to be underestimated. "They'll come for us again," one of Graverick's officers murmured, breaking the heavy silence. His voice trembled with fear. "They won't stop until we're—" "Enough," Graverick snapped, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "They've won this battle, yes, but the war is far from over." His words lacked their usual conviction, and his crew knew it. Graverick could see it in their eyes. The doubt, the fear. They had seen the humans for what they truly were, a force unlike any other in the galaxy. The ripple effect. News of the battle spread quickly, carried by traders, spies, and survivors who had witnessed the humans' relentless assault. Across the galaxy, species that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant began to reevaluate their assumptions. On the bustling trade world of Zenthara, Merchants whispered of a single human ship taking down an entire Dothar squadron. On the militarized moons of the Krillin Empire, generals studied reports of human guerrilla tactics with growing unease. Even the feared Syndicate of Kor, known for its ruthless mercenaries, began to question whether their operatives could match humanity's ingenuity. Gravrik's defeat was more than a tactical loss. It was a seismic shift in the galaxy's understanding of what humans were capable of. The debate among allies. Gravrik's transport eventually docked at a remote Dothar outpost, hidden within the dense rings of an uncharted gas giant. The Warlord's arrival sent shockwaves through the station's command structure. Gravrik, the conqueror of worlds, was now a defeated figure, his aura of invincibility shattered. A council of Dothar leaders convened to assess the situation. The chamber, carved from black stone and illuminated by eerie, pulsing lights, was filled with tense voices. "We must retaliate immediately," one commander argued, his voice echoing off the walls. "If we show weakness now, the humans will only grow bolder." "And what would you suggest?" Another countered, her tone sharp. "Throw more ships at them. More troops. You saw what happened to Gravrik's fleet. They'll tear us apart." Gravrik listened in silence, his jaw clenched. Finally, he spoke, his deep voice commanding attention. "The humans are not like any enemy we faced before," he said, his gaze sweeping the room. "They fight with their minds as much as their weapons. They adapt, they endure, and they thrive on chaos." The chamber fell silent as Gravrik continued. "If we are to defeat them, we must understand them. Their strengths, their weaknesses, their motivations. This is no longer a war of domination. It is a war of survival. A glimpse into humanity." Despite his defeat, Gravrik couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for the humans. Their ingenuity, their resilience, their relentless spirit. It was unlike anything he had encountered in his long career as a warlord. He spent hours poring over battle reports and intelligence dossiers, searching for clues about what made humans so dangerous. What he found only deepened his fascination. "They're not bound by tradition," Gravrik observed during a briefing with his remaining officers. "They don't adhere to rigid doctrines or predictable strategies. Every human is a variable, a wild card." He paused, his gaze distant. "And their greatest strength is their unity. They fight for each other, for something larger than themselves. That's why they're so hard to break." A galaxy on edge. As Gravrik worked to rebuild his forces, the rest of the galaxy watched with bated breath. The humans' victory over the Dothar fleet sent ripples of fear and uncertainty through every corner of space. Some sought alliances with humanity, hoping to avoid their wrath. Others began stockpiling weapons, preparing for the possibility of conflict. And a few, like Gravrik, vowed to uncover the secrets of humanity's strength and use that knowledge to destroy them. For the humans, however, the battle for Altera Prime was just the beginning. The victory had come at a cost, but it had also ignited a spark of hope. They were no longer just survivors. They were contenders on the galactic stage. Gravrik's revelation. Late one night, Gravrik stood alone on the observation deck of the outpost, staring out at the swirling gas giant below. The weight of his defeat pressed heavily on his shoulders, but beneath it lay something else, a burning determination. "They are dangerous," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the hum of the station. "But so are we." Gravrik knew the road ahead would be long and treacherous. The humans had exposed his weaknesses, shattered his pride, and left him questioning everything he thought he knew about war. But they had also given him something he hadn't felt in years, a worthy challenge. "They think they've won," Gravrik said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "But the game is far from over." As he turned away from the viewport, Gravrik felt the spark of a new plan forming in his mind. The humans had taught him the value of adaptability, and he intended to use that lesson well. This was no longer a battle of fleets or armies. It was a battle of wills, and Gravrik, for all his scars and defeats, was not ready to surrender.